Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about how to avoid plagiarism in your research papers and, frankly, why this really does matter to you. So, first of all, let's define plagiarism. All right. So, plagiarism is when you steal and pass off the ideas and words of others as your own, or when you use another's work without citing the source. And finally, presenting an idea from an existing source as new and original from you versus from the existing source. Now, ultimately, plagiarism is an act of fraud, okay? It means you're both stealing someone else's work as well as lying about it afterwards. So, yeah, it's pretty heavy duty stuff. Now, in my experience as a professor, these are the ways that I see plagiarism exhibited most of the time. Now, yes, every once in a while, I'll get a student who will submit a paper from somebody else as their own. That's about as blatant as it gets, okay? But also just copying phrases and words from another source without citing that source. I see this a great deal. I also see students who fail to use quotation marks when they're quoting from another source. And finally, and this is actually the most common one that I run into, is copying over so much of another's work that it makes up a substantial part of the student's submission. So, in other words, they're copying over a huge amount of work from other sources. And even if they're putting quotation marks around it and citing it properly, so much of the submitted paper is from other sources that it really doesn't count as the student's work. Okay. Now, why does this matter to you? Well, colleges and universities take plagiarism very seriously. So, if you plagiarize in your work, depending on the institution and your professor, you could just basically get a zero on anything you submit that is plagiarized. It could also be that you just plain failed the class. And in some cases, colleges or universities may put you on probation or even expel you from the institution altogether. So, yeah, this is kind of serious stuff and not something to be taken lightly. So, let's talk about how to avoid plagiarism. Now, I want to be clear. Yes, every once in a while, I'll have a student who just plain doesn't care and deliberately plagiarizes the work of another. But that's not the case most of the time. The vast majority of the time, students are plagiarizing, but not maliciously. They just don't know how not to plagiarize. What is the proper technique for citing sources and so forth to make sure that everything is on the up and up? So let's talk about that. First of all, I strongly recommend you document all your sources. Document your sources, any quotes you use, the ideas you use from these sources, and have this as a separate file so that you know where you got all of your information. Now, depending on the length of your work, of your research paper, and how many sources you have, this could be a simple annotated bibliography, or you might have a complete spreadsheet that lists all your sources and the websites and the ideas and the quotes and so on and so forth. If I'm doing, say, like a PhD dissertation, right, that's a whole spreadsheet of that nonsense. But for most papers, a simple annotated bibliography, say that 10 times fast, right? It'll do the job. And I'm actually a big fan of annotated bibliographies because they allow me to really organize my thoughts, organize my sources, and figure out how I'm going to present this work in my own research paper. So, something to bear in mind. You also want to correctly correctly apply the formatting that is required for the assignment. Now, this could be APA, it could be MLA, it could be Chicago, it doesn't matter. Whatever formatting is required for the paper, learn that formatting technique and apply it correctly to the entire paper. Now, I know this can seem overwhelming, but the truth of the matter is, there's only a handful of principles that need to be applied to most papers. And it doesn't really take much to figure out those principles. You can use online resources to figure out how to do that. And once you get the hang of it, it's pretty much autopilot. So take the time to learn the formatting process. The next one is use quotations when quoting. Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with taking something from an existing source, copying it, and pasting it into your paper, so long as you include quotation marks and cite the source, both in the reference section and in text citations. So, yeah, you can copy and paste stuff all day long. Don't worry, we're going to talk about how to do that properly, right? So long as you add quotation marks and cite the source. Also, cite the source even when you are paraphrasing. Now, instructors will often tell you, hey, you can use material from other sources, but put it in your own words. You've heard that a lot, right? Make sure you put it in your own words. That's paraphrasing. Well, you absolutely want to put it in your own words, but you also want to cite it, right? Once again, both in-text citations and the reference section in the back of the paper. Now, why are instructors encouraging you to put it in your own words, to paraphrase it? Well, because then you're processing it through your own mindset, through your own filters, and it increases your understanding and comprehension of the idea and puts you in a position where you are literally teaching somebody else the idea, which kind of goes up Bloom's taxonomy and so on and so forth. We're not going to go into that here. But the point is, it's a good solid practice. Just make sure you cite it. Otherwise, it's going to look like you're trying to pass these ideas off as your own, and that's not what you want to do. Another one is, and this one is key, add your own ideas and thoughts, okay? I run into this one a lot. You know how I said earlier, I often have students who will, plagiarize even if it's cited or quoted, right? They'll have huge chunks of other papers put into their own paper, and they really are making the paper make the points for them. Let me put it another way. In order to not plagiarize and in order to write a really good research paper, you want to find sources that support your own thesis or your own assertions. So you add those sources, cite them correctly, and say, based on this, this author makes the assertion that blah, blah, blah. Or if you're making an assertion or offering a thesis at the beginning of the paper or at the beginning of a paragraph, you want to add sources that support your thesis, okay? So the goal is to use the cited research to support your ideas and assertions, not make them for you. Your sources are not making your points for you. They're helping support your points. Okay? All right. Now, when in doubt, cite. This is another key aspect. In general, the rule of thumb is you don't have to cite what is considered common knowledge. But you know what? Figuring out what's common knowledge can be pretty tricky. So if you're ever in doubt, cite. Right? You're not going to get in trouble for citing too many sources. You will get in trouble for not citing sources that you include in your work, right? So when in doubt, cite it. And then finally, and I know this sounds weird, but this is real, avoid plagiarizing yourself. Now, let's read this. Self-plagiarizing is when you use work you've already submitted for another class, basically recycling a paper to avoid completing the assignment. I get this a lot, guys. And I get the temptation and I get the logic, right? You're kind of like, well, hell, it's my own damn paper. I wrote it myself. I wrote it for this other class. And you know what? With a few tweaks and a few edits, I can submit it to this other class and it would still fit the need of the assignment. I get the logic, right? But that doesn't hold up. That is self-plagiarizing. I want you to consider this. The purpose of college and university is to learn, develop, and practice new skills, especially practice these skills. For many classes, this is done through written assignments. By recycling papers, you learn nothing new, and your instructor has no way of assessing how well your skills are developing. All right. So, no, you can't just write one awesome paper in your freshman year and then in your senior year use it for 15th time, right? This is self-plagiarizing. You need to avoid this. Now, by the way, you can cite your own papers. You can totally cite your own papers, right? And researchers do this all the time. Trust me, when I was doing my PhD dissertation, there were authors that I was citing all the time because they were kind of like the experts in their field. Well, when you look at their papers, they're citing their past research. That is totally acceptable and totally required, in fact. Okay, a final thought, guys. Oftentimes we plagiarize not because we're trying to cheat or anything like that. Yeah, every once in a while you plagiarize because you just don't want to do the assignment and you found this other paper that's really good and so on. That happens. But most of the time, it's because we lack confidence in our own thoughts, in our own assertions, in our own ideas. Don't. Your thoughts and ideas and assertions, they're awesome. They're totally awesome. And so when you combine your thinking and your ideas and kind of your vision with research that's out there in the body of literature, then you're going to win. You're going to totally rock it, right? So have confidence in yourself. Use material out there to support your ideas and assertions and grow and learn and expand and develop as a intellectual being, right? Don't just slough it off on somebody else. Okay, so there you go. Thanks for joining me. By the way, if you want to learn more about plagiarism, go to plagiarism.org. They have a ton of really good resources to kind of help you understand this a little bit further. But otherwise, go off, do some great research, push your ideas, make your assertions, prove your theses, and you'll do fantastic. All right, thanks for joining me. We'll talk again soon.